Welcome back to where we're working on an action RPG in GameMaker. So in this video, as indicated by the image on the screen right now, I want to take a look at adding some ranged weapons. And in the process of adding these ranged weapons, we're definitely going to get some experience working with some UI elements. We're going to put in a charge bar because I want to represent how long you hold the mouse is how far the bow will shoot. And then also some collision detection. We're going to upgrade our collidable objects to determine if they are tall or not. So like an arrow could fly over a river, but an arrow is not going to fly over a tree. And so that way we can have a little bit more control, and then we'll learn a lot about some GameMaker programming along the way. So let's start with what we always have to start with. We want to add a bow. We're going to need some UI elements because we have that inventory now. And we're going to need an actual icon for the, well, not an icon, in-game representation of the bow. So we need a UI icon and a in-game graphic. So under UI, I'm going to right-click, create a new sprite. And this will be called SPR_UI_bow. And I'm going to go to import. And there is a bow.png right here, this little one. Now, if you recall, our inventory is going off of a 64 by 64 size. So I'm going to bump this up to 64. I don't need to center the origin because the inventory assumes that this origin's left to the top left. So under player, we have our weapons collection. We're going to need to load the bow and an arrow. So we're going to create a new sprite. And this will be called SPR_weapon_bow. And we will import that graphic. Now I do want to rotate this so it's facing to the right. So we're going to go to edit image. And we're going to then rotate a few times. All right, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now I want, I need to also position where it's going to appear in the player's hands. So that's kind of up to you, but I'll put the hand in the center here. And we'll just kind of do that. All right, so that is good. Let's add a arrow. So right-click weapons, create a new sprite for SPR_projectile, or we'll just actually spell it projectile _arrow. So make sure you spell projectile right. Okay, that looks right. And we're going to import this tiny little arrow. Now this is, I think, going to be too small, so I am going to double its size to 64. And position the origin wherever it would make sense for rotations to occur. So I think the dead center. And then I'm going to update the collision mask. So I do want to switch it off rectangle because the default rectangle doesn't rotate. So this will be the collision box no matter if the arrow is kind of rotated in this direction or like a diagonal or something. So we could do rectangle with rotation, which would just make this the hitbox, or you could get more specific. I'm fine with rectangle with rotation. So rectangle with rotation. All right, we can close that. So I'm thinking, well, we're mostly done with the sprite work for now. Mostly. So let's jump over to weapons. And now we're going to create a bow here. So it's not going to be parented from the melee weapon because it's going to be like a whole different set of logic. So I'm going to right-click on weapons, go to create object, and this will be obj_weapon_bow. And so that's going to be the name of my thing. So let's choose the sprite. So we've got our sprite here. And it is going to need a few instance variables. So inside of the instance variables, we're going to need, well, actually, we won't. I don't think we will need exist counter. We will need angle. Let me think. Do I use angle start? Yeah, I probably should. Because I will. Just trying to think. Do I use it? No, I don't think I'm going to need angle start. But we will need charge and charge max for our two components for now. And we are going to have to kind of recreate most of what the melee parent was doing. So for the sake of simplicity, I am going to just copy these two events out of melee parent. So I'm going to right click them. Oh, I can't do them both at the same time. I'm just going to select one of them, hit copy event. So I'm right clicking create step, copy event. Then I'm going to go over, I'm going to just left click into the events panel here, right click, paste event. And then I'm going to do the same for begin step, copy event, and paste event. So I'm going to X out of melee parent. So in the create, let's begin by pruning some of this. So spawning at the player is important, so we will need this. We don't actually poke with the bow, so we won't need that. We will need this angle. So I'm just going to call this var angle. And then we're going to, we don't need to calculate an XY offset. I'm going to replace angle start with just angle. And I don't really need to do a whole lot here, except for replace that. And I can move it out. However, it still will need to be flipped. So this is my new create step. And now let's check the begin step. And we'll test it real quick just to make sure. The depth, it's going to look funny no matter what we do, so I guess that's fine. Let's grab that code for our angle calculation real fast, because we do need that during step. So right after moving with the player, we're going to calculate our angle again. And then if this, let's see, do we still need this? Yeah, we will need, we could take, let's just copy this, because we want this behavior during every frame. So effectively, we're copying from line 8 to 19. And I can replace that. I do not need poke. I do not need the transform. I don't need exist counter because we're going to make the bow disappear when I release the mouse. And instead of being based off of when the timer's up, instead, we're going to make the bow disappear. So we will change this to mouse check button released MB left. So when you release the left mouse button, we then unlock the animation and we allow you to attack again. We haven't spawned the arrow yet, but we should be able to see the bow appear. So, well, I guess we could hit play just to verify that the code runs, but we don't have the bow in the game yet. So, like when I pop open my inventory, I want to add my bow to this inventory. So let's see how we would add a new weapon to our inventory. This would apply for if you wanted to have it something you could pick up. if we really wanted to just experiment with that real fast. So let's put an item in here. Now, I suppose that deserves a new folder. And I suppose it should be plural, items. So we're going to create a new object. And this will be called obj underscore item underscore bow. And this is going to be the item that if you bump into it, it will give you the bow. So we set this up. Now, the event that we want is if we collide with the player. We could also generalize this as I'm thinking about it, but let's do one basic, and then if like in another video, if we want to add some more items, we can just generalize this concept. So if bumped into player, add to inventory. So we want to go look up the code for how we added something to the inventory. That was handled inside of the game manager. And we handled that, I believe, when the room started. I'm sorry, no, that's when the game started. Or the create step. So we did this command. So this command here adds this to our inventory. So we're going to just take one of these, jump over to my item, and I'm going to paste this. And so I'm going to make this say bow. The sprite is bow, and the weapon associated with it is the bow. So now the only issue is this inventory. So inventory is not a list that is found inside of this object. Inventory exists inside the game manager. So in order for us to reference that, we're going to, hold down too much right click there. We're going to need to just, instead of say inventory, access my game manager, global.manager.inventory. And then that should insert it to our inventory. And then destroy this object. And so that will add this bow to my inventory. Oh, we got to place it in the map first. So we'll put it over here. Now, I will say that the issue could occur that you can pick up multiple copies of the bow. So we'll look at retaining room states in a future video when we deal with enemies. So so notice I don't have the bow in my inventory now. I bump into it, and now I do have the bow in my inventory. But like I said, maintaining room states. I have another bow. I have another bow. And so on. So we will, in a future video, make it so that the game remembers that you picked up that bow and doesn't spawn more. But let's see if we can get it to appear. So I'm not getting anything showing up. So, well, we got our item spawning correctly, which is good. So we just need to take a look at potentially why this might not be showing up. So check if the mouse button is released. So we pick up the bow, put it in our hands. Oh, that was working. That was weird. Oh, I had my inventory open the whole time because I forgot that I made it so that you can't do things with your inventory open. So we have our bow. Now it does appear behind the player, which is, and we don't really change our rotation. So, I mean, that's something that we could play with in the future. If we're really concerned with, we want the bow on top of the player, that's an easy fix, because I do think it would look better if the bow's on top of the player. And all we got to do now is spawn the arrow with it. So the lazy fix for putting the bow on top of the player is, instead of doing this, is we would just say depth equals global.manager.data_player.depth -1. So it will always be the player's depth -1, which means it should always appear on top of the player. So now it's always appearing on top of the player, which it gives you a clearer indication of which way you might be aiming. Okay, so we got that. So next up, we want to get the arrow, and we want to make it so that the arrow, you can hold down the attack to charge the arrow. So now we're going to move on to making the arrow. So we need I'd probably still put this under weapons. We're going to create a new object called obj projectile arrow, and I'm going to give it the sprite of the player arrow. As far as variables, perhaps damage might make sense here, but I don't think we've done damage on any of our weapons yet. So no, we have not. So we'll play with damage when we put enemies in the game. So otherwise, the only thing the arrow possibly needs is some kind of tracker for its exist duration. And exist duration max. So how long does this arrow stick around for? So we could do like 1 second before it disappears. And then let's add let's do this in end step. So we'll check for exist timer. So we're going to exist duration plus equals 1. If exist duration is greater than exist duration max, then we want to destroy this. And so it would just be instance destroy. Now, I do want to eventually add a particle effect just for if the arrow, when it destroys, so we can have like a visual confirmation of like, why did it disappear? So when we hit, well, I guess run won't really do much. We need to spawn this. So let's actually spawn our arrow. So we go over to weapon bow. And right here, when I am holding down the left mouse button and releasing it, this is where I would want to spawn my arrow. So the process for spawning it is the same as doing any projectile, although I'm kind of impressed we haven't done a projectile yet in this project. We spawn it first. So var arrow equals instance underscore create underscore layer. This is creating it at the X and Y of the bow, so it's kind of coming out of the player's hand. So this is spawning on the instances layer, so if you don't have a capital I instances layer, you'll probably either get a crash or it won't work. We'll set the direction and the speed. So arrow dot direction equals direction. Arrow dot speed equals arrow dot image angle. So the direction that the graphic is facing. Direction, so just kind of a differentiation between the two variables. Direction is the actual physics direction of the object. Image angle is, so you can see the rotation of the sprite. Let's see, does mouse ever work on this? No. Image angle is the actual sprite's direction, and direction is the physics direction. And then we'll set the speed. Well, let's try 20 for now. And so this should spawn our arrow. So when we hit play, and we walk over and get our bow, and we click and release, I clicked too fast. We get an arrow. But, oh, see, my cat doesn't like this type of arrow. He thinks it should have a click and hold effect for you to be able to kind of get it to that speed. All right, fine. We'll also make it, randomly miss if you don't charge high enough. So my cat wants us to make it so that we have to click and hold this arrow for it to work. So let's set that up. And we were planning to do that anyway. I just don't tell my cat that with this charge, we're going to make it so that basically your character is charging up the bow attack. So all this has to do with just kind of making my comments here a little bit more stand out. Since all this up here has to do with like how it appears. And then down here has to do with the actual attacking. So when we're holding the mouse down, this is easy to do. If mouse, and we want this before the other code, if mouse check button MB left, charge, and this is a little bit fancy, charge equals the minimum of charge max or charge plus 1. So the idea is that if charge max is 60, or well, I guess it's currently 0, but let's go with 60. So you can hold it for 60 frames or 1 second, and this is going to power up my arrow. Every frame you hold it down, charge gains 1, up to the minimum of the current value of charge, or 60. So when charge is 0, it's going to take the minimum of 60 or 0, which would be, or 60 or 1, which will take 1, and so charge will equal 1. But once charge equals 60, when we attempt to add 1 to it, it's going to take the minimum of 60 or 61 And so we'll choose 60 and place it here. This is just a fancier way to cap a variable. You could use clamp to cap a min and a max if you wanted to. So then we want to do some code to kind of give it the speed based off of the charge. So first up, let's limit to only if you've been charging for 10 seconds. Well, 10 frames. If charge is greater than or equal to 10, then this code here will be inside of the curly braces. And then after we release the mouse, we should reset charge back to 0. And so we want to come up with a formula for us to do this. So let me pull up a math formula here using a wonderful resource. So using good old Desmos, I want to show what I want the speed to be. We could do linear, which would just simply be y, where y is your speed, is 1/6 of x. And so what that would do assuming this is a graph of the magnitude of how much you hold down, 60 frames right here being the max, and this is just you tapped it, you get a linear behavior. Now, being the math person that I am, I'm a fan of more complex functions, so I want to do a logistical function. So a logistics function is basically two exponential functions slapped on top of each other. And this is the core of the function. Turn off that. So this is a logistic curve. This part here is an exponential up, and then it reaches kind of a point of inflection, and then this is an exponential down. So I want to make it so that this is a kind of a cool way to handle that. Now this formula, I spent a few minutes playing around with to get it so it looks the best. And this is the formula that I ended up coming up with. And so the idea is that, the soonest we can release the bow is at 10 frames. And so if we release the bow at 10 frames, we're going to get 5% of the magnitude of the power of the bow. Whereas here, on a linear function, we would have gotten 16% of the power of the bow. So the idea is that the player needs to charge the bow for at least 42 frames for the bow to have, equal to the linear effect, so that the time into charging becomes beneficial. And especially this will matter if we affect damage. And then from 42 frames up to 60 frames, you're actually slightly better than linear. So this is kind of the sweet spot to release the bow, is anywhere in between this amount of frames. So, it's a little bit more complex of a mathematical function than just doing purely linear. But stuff like this can give you a lot of flavor in your game design, be it how you adjust movement, if movement is linear or if movement's like a logistic curve. So I'm going to implement this formula here in GameMaker real fast. So this will be 20 times 1 divided by, parentheses, 1 plus, and then it uses x. This is the exponential e function. So a lot of languages like Python and apparently GameMaker, there's like power, which does exponents, but x usually is just e. So 1 plus the exponential of negative 0.80 times, remember, math, the computers don't really like implicit multiplication, so we do need to put that time symbol there. But instead of x, we're using charge minus 35. Make sure that all of our parentheses are lined up right. So that's the exponential closing parenthesis, and then this is the closing parenthesis for the fraction on the bottom, minus 0.08 close parenthesis times, and that's 5 over 4, which is the same as 1.25. So could you just do charge over charge max? Probably. But I think this is slightly more flavorful. And actually, I might need to tweak this so that it can reflect the fact that it might need to scale based off of charge max. So instead of 35 here, this will need to be charge max divided by 2 plus 5. So you might want to pause and make sure that all of your parentheses have lined up correctly here. So now when we hit play, and I get my bow, it looks fine if I click and hold for a while. If I tap it, I get this pathetic little arrow. If I tap, I get nothing. If I hold for at least like 10 frames, I get something. And maybe I can make that a little bit stricter and make it so that you have to hold for 15 frames or something. And they all have the same exist duration, so if you just charge for a little bit, you're going to get a little pathetic arrow. If you charge for long enough, you get a good shot. So now the player needs some kind of visual feedback on how they're charging. We'll throw that into the next video. But the only thing that I want to cover in this final piece is I do want to give it a random variance based on your charge level. So we're going to create another thing here called random variance. And I'm going to call this, we'll make it 40. So it's a 40-degree arc of how random it could miss. So we'll call this random angle equals random underscore range from negative random variance to regular random variance. I'm assuming I spelled that correctly. We'll get over that. Let's just do -1 times that. Okay. Surprised that it's so unhappy about that, but we'll see if it causes an issue when we hit play. And then we will apply that random variance to here. So we'll say random angle. And then we're going to multiply it by this formula. Well, we're going to multiply by 1 minus that formula. So if I only hold for a little bit, notice that the arrow kind of aims poorly. And if I'm trying to hit that grass, I get up to, in this case, an 80-degree arc, because it's 40 positive and 40 negative, so that might be a little too punishing. But if I hold for the max charge, that's going to end up being 0. And so it'll be a perfect shot every time if you max charge it. So if you want to play around with this, you can. And I'm surprised that still says that this is an error, but oh well. Maybe I can make that error happy if I just do 1 times that. So that it can, like, it's a real. Anyway, but whatever. So that will give us kind of a cool effect on the arrow. And remember, you instead of this whole crazy formula, you could have just done charge divided by max charge and do a linear effect and get a very similar thing. So we will stop here, and in the next video, we will create a little charge bar right next to the cursor to give us an indication of how charged my shot is. And so that's a really cool lesson in seeing how to do kind of a quick UI element. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the math and hope you enjoyed the new ranged weapon and the ability to pick up new items.